Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Mental Health Impact Series show. Today, we're at season 2 and episode 20. We have come such a long way. We're continuing to have these conversations to break cultural stigma and encourage outreach for professional help and other supports. Today, we have a very special guest with us, and we will be talking about mental health, alternative healing, alcohol use, destigmatization. In general, we have a lot of different things that we're going to be talking about today. But before we get started, did you know only 10% of Americans dealing with addiction receive treatment? People with severe mental disorders die 10 to 20 years earlier than their age. Complementary and alternative therapies are health related therapies that are not part of mainstream medical care. They are thought to create well being, increase well being, aid relaxation, and promote good mental health. Having said that, today we have a very special guest with us, Sabrina Mabel Nicholson from Toronto. She is a soul expression coach. She's a 30-year-old self-employed coach currently living here in Canada. She combines educational and well-being services from the realms of spirituality and developmental psychology to support women, especially in caregiving positions, to empower themselves through self-compassion, boundary, and energy work. Without any further ado, hello, Sabrina. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. I feel so grateful to be here. And I'm really excited, honestly. Anytime I get to show up and talk about mental health and addiction and share my own journey, it's a privilege. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it means so much to us that you were able to share your time with us on a Friday to continue this conversation. For those of you that don't know, Sabrina was our panel speaker for World Reach Out Together Day 2021, which was on Monday, July 12th. Sabrina, how was your experience?
Oh, I loved it. I was actually telling Ankita that I was actually sick that day. I wasn't feeling well. And something I've been practicing, which I learned from my mentor, is showing up at 45 degrees, which
Okay.
means that it's like to sustain your energy and to be able to show up and be of service instead of showing up at 100% some days, and then some days you have to be at 5%. It's like finding the sweet spot where your energy, you can like maintain it in the long run. And it's called the 45 degrees. And so that day, I knew how important it was to be there and to offer the healing.
Yeah.
And I just decided I'm going to show up at 45 degrees. And so I actually was not feeling well, but by offering the healing and being of service, I ended up increasing my own well-being. So it's so powerful how showing up and being of service is actually also healing for me. And so it was a beautiful experience. And what I was present to were professionals, in psychology, coaches, public speakers, authors who have all personally experienced mental health issues and are also trained, and that they were showing up vulnerably and they were able to see themselves. And what I was most shocked about is so openly talking about their spirituality. And for me personally and professionally, it was so affirming, because I do get scared sometimes to show up and talk about spirituality, because there's a stigma that if you're working with spiritual modalities or holistic modalities, that you're somehow not as valid. Like, that's the story that I have. And so it was just really powerful to get to be in the presence of all of these people who have themselves personally had mental health issues, and to get to hear their story and how they've transformed their lives. So thank you. Like, it was an honor to be there.
Oh, that's so sweet to hear, Sabrina. Thank you. So our next question was, this event, the main purpose behind us hosting World Reach Out Together Day every year is to destigmatize, is to encourage people to feel comfortable, to know that help is available, recovery is possible. And do you feel like we were able to accomplish that?
Yes, absolutely. And because what I heard was unity, that we're not alone. And there, even though maybe in our personal lives, we maybe feel, because I think often personally, we feel like maybe our family misunderstands us. We feel like our partners don't understand us, or maybe our colleagues, and we're afraid. What I heard is that there are people out there, on Clubhouse, on Instagram, on Facebook, there are communities who are there to support you. And that's what I was present to. And I personally made so many connections that day. Like I met over 20, 30 people, some of which I'm going to be meeting for coffee. And it made me feel that I'm not alone, that there is a community that I can connect with that's, outside the spiritual realm, that's outside the educational realm, that are there to empower me and that I can empower them. So I think your message was very clear, and the space was very safe and vulnerable, which I think is so important. People showed up vulnerably and authentically. And it was not this like kind of like positive, like toxic positivity of like, we're all okay now and everything is okay. Like it was clear that people are still dealing with things and they're still showing up and there's a community. So I think your message was so clear.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Sabrina. Thank you for sharing that. We have comments coming in from the audience. So excited for this talk with Sabrina today. Wow, we're only 7 minutes in. That's
I love
beautiful.
it.
She was absolutely amazing on World Reach Out Together Day. Yes, she was. Her healing session was so good. Sabrina, I'm going to share this with you. I know we're live, but I have to tell you this. My mother was there on Clubhouse. And after your healing session, she actually told me that it made her cry, but in a good way. Like she was just releasing. And that brought so much joy to me just because, it clearly there was someone in the audience that participated and she was explaining to me at what point. So she was paying attention and it was so good to know that, you know, it helped. It made a difference. Like you're incredible, Sabrina. If you're in the audience and you're watching right now, please make sure to go follow Sabrina and reach out to her personally. By the end of this interview, she will be sharing where you can find her. So stay tuned. In the meantime, I'm going to read the second comment from the audience. Thanks for joining us, Sabrina. It was great to see your World Reach Out Together Day, and this is such an important topic to discuss as some parts of the world remain or go back into lockdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a difficult time where, what I'm aware of is like, we're all in parallel realities.
Yeah.
Whereas for some of us, there are moments of this past year that have been difficult. For others, we've had community and it's been easier. And then there are exactly places and times that everyone's going through different waves of this, and everyone is coping in different ways. And that's why I think at this time, it is so vital to talk about mental health. And, I know you were stating some facts at the beginning, but one of the things that really stood out to me on my own journey, learning about my mental health and like issues with addiction, is that there's a high, I think it's that 20% of people, or no, sorry, this is from CAMH, and I think this is really important to say. People with mental illness are twice as likely to have a substance use problem compared to the general population. And 20% of the people with mental illness have a co-occurring substance use problem. And especially with schizophrenia, it's as high as 50%. And I think this is so important. And I know I'm veering a little bit off topic here, but people who have addiction problems are shamed, they're ostracized. They're often like considered to be people who are like inappropriate, who it's their fault, their problem, like, and they're often left to deal with it on their own. And they often end up being isolated from their family and friends. And they're either pressured into doing treatments that they're not ready for, or they end up homeless and on the streets.
Yeah.
Or they end up in a psychic ward, highly medicated. And again, they're blamed like as though they are the problem. But the truth is the majority of people who have mental health issues do not have the tools, right, to cope in a healthy way. And so what do? They go to a substance that gives them an escape. It gives them back their power, actually. It's like something that they can trust that makes them feel better. Because oftentimes when we have mental health issues, and I'm someone, I'm healing from complex PTSD, and I'm okay, so like there's no concern there, but we often feel like we have a loss of power and that other people don't understand us, and our experience is often belittled. And so the substance is like, oddly enough, this weird relationship where it's like we can rely on it, it's always going to be there, it makes us feel good, and it's like the one thing that we're like, I know this will be okay, even though in fact it amplifies often the mental health issue, and it leads to more trauma, it leads to more issues. But I think it's important for people to understand that it is correlated, and most people who use substances is because at the root of it, they have a mental health issue that's usually caused by trauma. Like all of these things are interconnected.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important for people to understand that in that person's world, it's like they're already dealing with feeling broken. And then if on top of it, we're adding that they're shamed, it just like amplifies their whole experience. And then they're actually more likely to go back to the substance use. So I wanted to highlight that because that was the main thing that I wanted to talk like or highlight today, because there's not a lot of information about this and it's not known to the wide public.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing that research and sharing that with everyone. That brings me to my next question, Sabrina. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey? What does that journey look like that has brought you here today? You are actively investing in your well-being, which is how you're being of service to others. And what does that journey look like?
Yeah. And I do want to say, like, there might be some trigger warnings, and if anyone listening is feeling overwhelmed, like, it's okay if you need to pause or, and I want to say that I'm responsible for my well-being, and by no means does anyone need to feel responsible for anything that I share. It's really things that I'm comfortable with now, openly speaking about. So I would say my journey actually started at 5 years old. My parents divorced, and for some reason, my experience of it was like earth shattering. Like a rug was pulled underneath me, and all my sense of safety was taken away. And I didn't have the words or the understanding of this at 5 years old. But how it showed up was like stomach aches, headaches, not being able to sleep, having panic attacks. I was having body dissociations at 5 years old. So feeling like my body and my mind were disconnected. But as a kid, I didn't understand this. So it was very frightening. And my parents, I love them to death, but that generation did not have the knowledge or the understanding about mental health, or any kind of understanding of how to support children with mental health issues, because I don't even think that was a word, And so I ended up coping by internalizing everything. So the way I chose to cope was to smile, pretend everything was okay, because I didn't want to upset anyone. And I felt like it was wrong. And I was like, there was something about like showing my actual emotions, like fear, sadness, that would upset everyone around me and make them feel uncomfortable. And this was all happening subconsciously. And this carried through my childhood and adolescence, and ended up showing up with my first depression in grade 6, where I actually self-harm. And it was my sister, fortunately, who recognized it. And I was able to get a counselor at school. And that counselor, like, in a way, saved my life, because she said to me, if you're still self-harming, I have to tell your parents. And I didn't want my parents to know. So I said, no, I'm not self-harming, I promise. And so I stopped because I didn't want my parents to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then what ended up happening again is like my home situation was a bit difficult. Like my parents each had their own partners. There was a little bit of disturbances, like a lot of things happening at home. So I ended up going to drinking to cope. Again, not understanding that I'm using it as a coping skill. You're 14, 15 years old, you think you're just having fun, but it was very excessive for me. And it kept kind of piling on in that way. And at the same time, I was a workaholic. So I was like working so hard to try to validate myself and feel good. And then simultaneously hiding that I was suffering and actually using like alcohol as like a coping mechanism. And by the time I was 25, I had attracted a lot of traumatic situations. I ended up in relationships where I was like psychologically and sexually abused without ever understanding. And I kept perpetuating the trauma. I kept attracting people who were not good for me, who had mental health issues, who had addiction issues, because it's almost like I felt like I'm not good enough and I'm broken and I just deserve someone who's just like me. And at least they accept me and they love me. And so I kept compounding difficult circumstances. And then I kept using school to make up for it and my profession, while again, still always going back to alcohol. And at 25, I remember waking up and just like feeling so anxious every day, feeling like I was going to throw up. I had a headache, and I had just decided that this is what my life is like. This is just life for me. But there was something inside of me, like a little voice that knew deep down there could be something better. I just didn't know what. And I was going to therapy because I was privileged to have benefits. You know, as a teacher, I had benefits and I used them. And I went to therapy. I also tried being vegan. I went to yoga and I tried all these different things because I knew there has to be something else, like something other than medication, let's say. And through this journey, I discovered Reiki. So Reiki is a healing modality that works at the energetic level, working in the quantum field, right? That works with the frequency of the thought, the frequency of the emotion and the body. And this was the light at the end of the tunnel for me. Because when I received my first treatment from a good friend, Catherine, it was like something was released out of me. And I felt electricity all over my body. And for 4 days, I cried and I cried and I cried. And I realized how unhappy I was and that a lot of it was with my lifestyle. And so in that moment, it was like the little seed I planted for my journey of being introduced to holistic modalities and knowing there's something more. And now it's not to say that everything got better. I did end up going back to substance use several times. In fact, other substances. I did end up going back to difficult situations, but the holistic modality world was introduced, and that allowed me to start the journey of self-healing. And now I'm 30 and I am healing from complex PTSD. I no longer have anxiety. I no longer suffer from depression. And I'm able to say that I have a whole toolkit that allows me to continuously work on my well-being and choose now to have people in my life who are healthy for me and choose lifestyle habits that are good for me. And I no longer, I've broken the cycle of attracting more traumatic events. So I have come a very long way. So that's a little glimpse of my story and where it began. So I could say more, but I want to be conscious of time.
That's, this sounds, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being so vulnerable here and sharing a little bit about your background. I think it is so inspiring. Honestly, Sabrina, every time I hear you talk about your journey, it inspires me every single time. I just want to encourage you and send you more strength so you can keep going and keep spreading this message, because there's so many people that will connect to this. Would you say that Reiki was the first thing in your journey that helped you, I guess, transform or move in a different direction? But what were the other tools that you ended up putting in your toolkit that helped you continue to sustain well-being and not go back to the old habits?
Yes. Well, first, I do want to say, before I was introduced to Reiki, and lots of people know this book, but I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
And that was actually what also allowed me to develop mindfulness. So through that book, I was able that year to start to notice in my life what I was doing that was making me feel good, and just starting to be aware of my thoughts. And that's when I first noticed, like, oh my gosh, my mind is so cruel to me, or my mind goes so fast. Like I would have like horrible thoughts. Like I was always thinking like something bad's going to happen. That person doesn't like me. That person's out to get me. Like it was very intrusive thoughts that I was having, but the mindfulness piece allowed me to identify it. So I would say awareness is what started it. And then I started to do little things like take baths. I know it sounds simple, but I would take a bath and relax after a long day of work.
Mm-hmm.
That's where like the yoga came in. I started to go dancing. So little things start to happen like that. And then I actually found a therapist who is under the scope of mindfulness, and she practices cognitive behavior therapy. So again, it's being able to identify your behavior and how often your actions and your behavior are what's triggering your emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So what she would have me do is look at my week and be like, okay, this week you're going to log every activity that you do, and you're going to write from 1 to 10 how it makes you feel. And I started to notice like gardening made me feel really good. So I would do more gardening. But watching Netflix for 6 hours made me feel numb and like kind of, it didn't improve or like decrease. It was just kind of numbing. So I was like, okay, maybe a little bit less of that. And so those were two things that really made a difference: mindfulness and cognitive behavior therapy. And again, there's actually so many resources out there in cognitive behavior therapy that you can find that are free. I forget the website that I use, but if I think of it, I'll share it with you. And then the last piece is that I started to connect with friends, and I started to show up. Even when I didn't feel great, I was like, I'm just going to show up. I'm going to go to the concert, like the little bar concert. I'll show up to yoga. I'll show up to a small soccer game. And the more I did things that made me feel good, it helped me remember that it was possible to feel good every day. And from there on, I was just introduced to more and more communities and activities that made me feel good. And the big piece I haven't mentioned is, at the same time, professionally, I decided to do my Master of Education in Developmental Psychology, because I noticed that my own students were anxious and depressed. And so I decided that professionally, I wanted to learn more and actually have more theory and background and understanding. So as I was learning for my students, I was learning for myself, and that sustained me. So as I'm doing my master's, I was like on a personal and professional journey, and I had a community to support me that was academic, that was like medical, right? Like having a therapist. And then I had the spiritual community through Reiki, and the social community where I was with friends. So all of those things together made a difference.
That's incredible, Sabrina, that you were able to do, like, you initiated everything. Like
Mm,
you are the reason you are here today.
mm.
And you mentioned something about addiction earlier. If you don't mind, could we spend a little bit time on that? Just because
Yeah.
I think, in specific, you mentioned alcohol use.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say it was the role of community in that moment that helped you not overuse overuse it,
Yeah.
or was it again something from inside saying this is not it for me?
Okay. Yeah. Great question. So with the alcohol, that was less of an addiction for me. I think it was more of a like a dependence, but I actually had issues with like drug addiction. So at a certain point in my life, I met certain people, and it was almost like this weird crossway where I could choose between focusing on my spiritual journey and Reiki, or I could choose going to parties and using drugs. It was like this very, very clear moment. And what happened at that time is I tore my ACL and my MCL in my knee. So I had been playing soccer and I tore like my ligaments. And so soccer had been like a really good coping mechanism. So then I couldn't even walk or play. And then on top of it, my boyfriend then and we broke up. And I was like shattered. Like I was so heartbroken.
Yeah.
And I think there was a part of me that just gave up and was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep being responsible and showing up and doing everything for everyone. And so I actually took a leave from teaching. But in that moment, I chose the path of partying and drugs. It's like there was a part of me that's like, I need to not surrender, but like I needed escape. And for that year and a half, I ended up using drugs like too much, to the point where I couldn't go without it. So I couldn't go a week without it. And I would shake and I would think about it, and I would ditch friends to go use drugs. And I know now, looking back, it's that I was experiencing so much trauma. Like all these little events kept happening to me. And it's like I couldn't cope anymore. And that's what I went to. And what ended up happening is when I look back, it was in a way self-initiated, because many people thought it was just for fun, that it was just, oh, we're just doing this on the weekend, no problem. It's just like a little recreational fun. But I started to see that I wasn't in control anymore. Like for me to ditch my friends to go use drugs is not who I am. Mm-hmm. Like to be someone who is now needing to go spend money on this when I barely have any money, that's not who I am. And I started to get little hints, like in the back of my mind, like little bells ringing. Like I remember being in Berlin at a club trying to buy drugs. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this because I think it's so important to openly talk about this.
Yeah.
And the drug dealer said to me, "You're an angel to me." He's like, "Why are you doing drugs?" He's like, "I'm not going to sell you drugs." He's like, "I look at you, I don't know why you're here doing this." And it was like, I could not believe that a random drug dealer was saying no to me. And I had money, and he was like, "No, I'm sorry." And like all these little things was like, I had guardian angels or something watching over me saying, "This is not your path. This is not your path. You're so much more than this." And not to say that, again, like it's not to shame, but like I knew that if I kept going on this path, I would ruin my career, I would ruin my health, and I had a chance of losing my license as a teacher. Even though I wasn't teaching then, it was like I could see that like I'm self-sabotaging and this is not where I want to go. So when I returned from my travels, I actually I made a choice that I wouldn't use again. I set a deadline. And then I called the Center of Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, called CAMH, and I called them and I said, "I have an addiction problem and I want help." And this is when I learned that there were all of these free resources. Yeah, there's these free resources. So they offer support for people who have mental health issues and addiction for free. And it's just an intake. They ask you questions. They don't require that you take medication. They don't tell you what to do, but they provide group support. And I went to that for 9 months. So I was in a women's recovery group. I would go once a week, and you have to openly share if you're using or not. And, they check up on you. You cannot show up if you're using that day. And that's actually what made the biggest difference in my life and I know some people do not like CAMH, but my experience was of being embraced, of compassion, of empathy. And for once, I was with a group of women who listened to me and didn't judge me. And I felt so supported. And that's what helped me really learn not to go back to that. And that's where I learned about boundaries. I learned more about grounding techniques, more about mindfulness and compassion. And I discovered this is where the place that helped me identify that I had complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. And that a lot of the reasons why I was going to substance use was because of the trauma. And in trauma, we feel like we have no control, and the drugs were giving me a sense of control. So
that was so powerful. I was like, I showed you, I was having goosebumps, but you're incredible. You're a trailblazer, and we at Reach Out Together, we're going to do everything in our power to support you in your journey. Do you mind sharing, Sabrina, what practices do you adopt for your clients who are suffering from some kind of addiction?
Yes. So often I end up actually working with a lot of women who have compassion burnout. And the addiction piece can show up in different ways. So addiction is not only drugs, alcohol, it can be things like being a shopaholic, like always needing to buy things. It can be overeating or undereating, like addiction can show up in two extremes. And often I see a lot of women who are workaholics. So they have an addiction to work and getting validation and control from overworking. Again, it's not to shame, it's just to say that this is like a common pattern. And so a lot of the tools, like I would say the most important tool is using boundaries. So boundaries literally means setting a limit so that you can feel safe. It can be a physical limit where you leave a situation that doesn't make you feel safe. It can be having a room in your home where you can surrender and cry and be able to be vulnerable. It could be having like a coach or a committed listener or a friend who creates a space where you can verbally talk and you feel safe. So boundaries can be in so many ways. It can be energetic boundaries. So like Reiki, for example, can be used for energetic boundaries. And with the boundary, you can create the space then to honor emotion. And I think this is the most important thing. And this goes across cultures in the world. The majority of us have been taught not to show difficult emotion.
Yeah.
Don't cry. Don't be angry. If you're angry, there's something wrong with you. If you cry, you're weak. You need to suck it up, like grow a pair, grow a hard shell. You're not going to make it in the world if you're sensitive. And we're taught over and over again, and especially men are taught not to cry, not to be angry. Don't talk about your problems. It's unacceptable. This is not the place and time. So we spend our lifetime suppressing emotion. We suppress guilt, we suppress shame, frustration, anger, like everything. It's all suppressed. And so what happens is you're holding all of this energy in your body, and it gets stored in your body actually as like, a frequency. And what happens is it gets stored in your organs, your muscles. And with honoring emotion, what happens is it gives us space to express emotions that could have come from something that happened to you at 5 years old, at 16 years old, that happened a week ago. But it's a space to release the emotion without having to do it on your own. Because sometimes when you're alone, it becomes overwhelming and we get lost in the memory and we feel unsafe because we think it's happening to us right now. Mm-hmm. But when you're in a space that someone is holding the space for you to just cry or be angry, it's like, we can be there to hold you so that you're not lost in the story and the memory, and your body doesn't think that it's unsafe again, because that's the biggest tool. And the other piece is like visual arts, for example, is a great tool to release the emotion or the story or the memory without having to talk about it. Because when we have trauma, we don't want to talk about it anymore. Sometimes we don't want to say the story. We don't want to repeat it again, or we don't even have the words. But visual arts allows you to express non-verbally the experience, and then you get to detach and actually mindfully observe the experience and kind of get some release without it all being inside of your body. So I don't know if this is making sense or if I'm talking too conceptually.
No, it definitely makes sense. We have another question here from the audience, Sabrina. I know we're running out of time here, but I think this is such an incredible conversation that we will have to bring you back. We will have to bring you back so we can continue this discussion. But we will take the last question for today from the audience. If we talk about mental health, a lot of taboos and stigmas are associated with it. So if you can give us some tips that can help each individual fight those stigmas, I'd appreciate it. So do you have any tips that someone can take on to combat stigma?
So one of the biggest thing, and this does take courage and it takes practice, is starting to openly talk about it. Because like I learned that the more I was hiding my addiction problem, I was part of the problem. I was afraid to show up as a teacher and talk about addiction because I was afraid of being ostracized or losing my job. And I'm not going to lie, a big part of why I resigned from teaching is because I wanted to be a public figure and openly talk about things and not have to deal with the backlash of that as a teacher, right? So that's why I'm an entrepreneur, because I want to show up freely, and that if people have a problem with me sharing, then they're probably not people I want to work with, So the biggest thing is, I think when you start to get comfortable speaking up, and it can be really small, like someone asks you to hang out and you're not well, and you just say to them, I'm taking care of my well-being right now. And for me, what's best is just having some space. So I won't be coming, or I used to have people call me crazy. I've gotten this so much, like personally, friends, like people calling me crazy. And I've learned to say, like, I get it. Like, you think I'm crazy, but like, I'm actually like having, emotional imbalances, and they're part of my trauma. And it's not okay to call me crazy. It's hurtful and it's not okay. So I'll actually address it. Or when I hear people making fun of someone with a mental health or with a mental health issues, like, I'll correct it. I'll say, like, it's actually not okay to talk about someone this way. So I try in my everyday conversations, when it shows up, to be really open about it with what I'm comfortable to share. I set boundaries with my friends, and yeah, people will peer pressure, but I say, like, no, I don't want to drink anymore, or I'm going to leave because I'm tired and that's what I need. And it's like learning, it's just learning to show up for yourself. And people will not like it at first. They might not respond well. And you'll be surprised how many people will respect it silently. And they will admire you and honor you. And the more you show up and speak up for yourself, whether it's through text, through a phone call, whatever it is, you will gain the personal strength to keep doing it, because it's going to show you how much of a difference it makes for yourself. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Sabrina. As we're wrapping up today's interview, where can people find you if they'd like to further the conversation with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Instagram. That's just where I like to be and show up in lives. And so you can find me on Instagram at Sacred Soul Melody. So that's the name of my business. You can send me a DM. Honestly, like, I respond really quickly. I love interacting with people, answering questions. And then on my Instagram are the links to everything else. So, to my website, links to book a call with me, so people can book like a free clarity call of 20 minutes if they just want to, discuss and have a space to share. And so I would say that's the best place. I am on Facebook as Sabrina Mabel. My business is also on Facebook, Sacred Soul Melody, but I find that my Instagram is the best place to reach me. I'm not great with email. So that's where I would say. And if not, my website is www.sacredsoulmelody.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sabrina. What's the one message you would like to share with the audience right now? Perhaps someone that is tuned in and maybe they have a similar background like you. What would you
Yeah.
like to share with them?
Yeah. So what I want to say is that, first, there's nothing inherently wrong with you, and that you are perfect, whole, and complete as you are right now. Yeah.
I love that. So beautiful. Well, you certainly made a huge difference for me today, and we're having a real conversation, so we'll continue to keep it real. As I was listening to you share today, it made me realize that I think I need to do, more of that, talk more about, or tell people more about some struggles that, my twin brother was suffering from. He was using alcohol quite a bit during the last few months while he was here. He passed away on July 12th, 2016, and that's the day we host World Reach Out Together Day. And just hearing how your experience has been and how you're here today, I know that it takes a lot to continue to do the inner work, to show up, to keeping your goal in mind, your vision in mind, and choosing the tough. It may be tough right now, but you're still choosing to do the tough work for yourself and to help other people. And I find that so beautiful, Sabrina. You are honestly the change that our world needs. So thank you. I appreciate you. Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, you're moving me, and I got shivers all over my body when you talked about your brother. What I do want to say, because I know money is one of the biggest thing that gets in people's way sometimes. And what I want to say is that when you spend money on yourself for coaching, for therapy, for mentorship, whatever it is, a transformational program, whatever it may be, that it is an investment in yourself for the rest of your life. and the investment in yourself will compound over and over again. And honestly, like that's, I think what's made the biggest difference is I choose to invest in me. And when I choose to invest in me, I'm investing in you and in us, and it makes the difference.
I love that. What a great thing to say. Well, thank you once again, Sabrina, for sharing your time with us on a Friday. You are amazing. We are very excited to bring you back for our next season and hopefully continue to work together, collaborate. We can host some rooms on Clubhouse. We just want to continue this conversation and hopefully encourage other people to seek professional help or other supports, because you're truly not alone in this. We're in this together.
Yes.
Beautiful. Do you know what our logo stands for?
I actually don't. And I love the logo, by the way. I've seen it so much. I don't know what it stands for.
Okay, so it's basically two palms put together, fists put together. And this in American Sign Language means together. So the instructor would, go in circles, and that's how people would know that they mean do the activity together. We use the color orange because orange in color healing therapy brings out feelings of warmth and happiness. We have a circle around it to symbolize the world. We at Reach Out Together, our goal is to heal the world together, community by community, conversation by conversation. And I truly believe we did that today.
It's so beautiful. And it's like the heart,
Yeah.
It's literally the heart center. I love it.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, this is a wrap of today's episode. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with Sabrina and with more people. So if you have a mental health story to share, whether you are a mental health professional or a person with lived experience, we want to hear from you. Let's destigmatize mental health recovery. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. You're awesome. We'll continue to chat, but great interview today. And